Greetings, you curious, you courageous Herle Burly-ites. Personally, I think it requires a hell of a lot of courage to deal with the world-shifting issues we face these days. Trade, the economy, climate, the list goes on and on. And maybe that's a good lead-in for our guest today. Daniel Debow, the guy driving the online initiative Build Canada, is here. Build Canada bills itself as a community of entrepreneurs, leaders, and motivated citizens who are committed to driving Canada's growth. The hub of it all is a website that allows Canadian builders to take their ideas, bold, courageous policy ideas, and publish them as specific, actionable memos that people can read and react to. That would include government and public policy people. I've talked about them on the pod before, about 5 months ago when I had the journalist David Skok from The Logic here. But now the volunteer chair, co-creator, and chief cheerleader, as he calls himself, of the whole thing, Daniel Debow has quite a CV. Ridiculously successful entrepreneur, early investor in over 50 tech companies, including about 5 or 6 that I personally use regularly. Board director, educator, mentor. We're going to find out more about his backstory because I want to start the interview there, what he's learned in business and what lessons are applicable to making Canada better, what he's trying to achieve with Build Canada, how much and in what ways does he think Canada needs to change? And does he see a new government that can help us grow, and I'm quoting from the website now, fast and fearlessly to become the most prosperous country in the world? Daniel, thanks for joining us on the Herle Burly today. You must have a lot
Hey,
on your plate, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
you know what? I'm actually happy to be here, really happy, and looking forward to a great conversation, David. So thank you for making the time for me.
Okay, cool. So let's start out with a little bit about you. Where are you from? Where in Canada did you grow up?
Sure. I'm from Toronto, grew up there, went to high school there, York Mills Collegiate, and I went to Western undergrad, and then I went to the University of Toronto for law school and business school.
Yeah.
And I worked in the States for about a year, but my entire career has pretty much been in Canada, but I have bounced back and forth between Silicon Valley a bit, both because I went to school out there, did a master's degree at one point, and then also because, well, I'm in technology. I'm in the technology industry as an executive, as a
Yeah.
founder, and an investor, and that's kind of where the game is. So I spent a lot of time out there as well, but I never formally left my residence here in Toronto. I love it here.
Awesome. It's a great city. What'd your parents do?
Yeah, my mom worked in the court system. She was a first generation immigrant to Canada. She was a
From
court
where?
interpreter. Well, she was, I think her family they were Polish Jews. So she was born somewhere post-war, I think in the Slovak Republic, which is where it is today. And then she was brought up in Venezuela. And my grandparents, who were Holocaust survivors, did not have an easy go of it. They got their life started again. And then I think in 56, there was another revolution or a coup. And my grandfather at that point was like, that's it, we're getting out of here. So my mom and her twin sisters went to St. Catharines, I think to Ontario Ladies College, which was for a couple of Spanish-speaking Jewish girls. It was a strange culture shock, I think, but she became what I think is a great Canadian. She brought up 3 good kids, and she was, as I said, she was involved in the court system. She was an interpreter, Spanish English translation simultaneously.
Cool.
My dad was a psychiatrist. He grew up. It's actually one of my businesses. He grew up above the store my grandfather had. My grandfather was also an immigrant. He had a printing store, printing press up on St. Clair Avenue. And my dad grew up above the store and went on to med school, became a psychiatrist. And that's what my parents did when I was growing up.
Awesome. Do you have siblings?
I do. I do. I have an older brother, lives in Hong Kong, has lived there for about 30 years. And I have a sister as well. She has worked in Canada her whole life.
Are they in business, the two of them? Either one?
Yeah, both of them are. My brother was a fund manager for a long time, and now is a starting a new venture out
Nice.
in Asia. And then my sister was at Rogers for about 25 years, and she left recently. She's also starting a new business. So yeah, I think
Nice.
It's good. Good to see the entrepreneurial spirit running. The funny thing
Excellent.
is, my dad is very confused because I'm a psychiatrist. I had no idea. I have no genes for this. I don't know where you got this, but I remind him
Right,
that
right,
his
right.
father,
Do
his
you talk about that? Where the interest in
yeah,
business might
yeah,
have come from?
yeah. Well, I mean, like I said earlier, my grandfather had a printing press business, very small business, but that's where my dad grew up above it, and obviously that was some entrepreneurialism, and
Mm.
my maternal grandfather also was an entrepreneur. I think they came to Canada, resettled, and I don't know exactly how, but he eventually ended up investing in a small factory in Windsor. And so can you imagine? I think it was pre 401 being built. He used to drive back and forth between Toronto, where his family was, and Windsor every Sunday night, drive out on a Sunday, work there at the factory, and then come back on, I guess, Friday afternoon so he could spend the weekend with his kids. And he did that for years and years and years.
Well, well. Um, so were you interested in business at a young age before you ended up doing what you ended up doing? What did you think you would do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I still ask myself that question today. What am I going to be when I grow up, David? Because as you mentioned, I've done a lot of different things. But the short answer is no, I wasn't. I realize I'm dating myself when make this reference, but I wasn't like an Alex P. Keaton type. I didn't have a stock portfolio, and
No.
I wasn't doing that. Uh,
Did you take
if
a
anything,
briefcase to class, to school?
no, no. Look, you know what it was? I like being involved though, David. I was in students government and I like to organize. The biggest thing I think it was a big thing for me is I like to organize rock concerts. You can see here I'm still pretty involved in music. I'm in a music studio right now, but this is where it started. I wanted to organize concerts for my high school classmates, and I wasn't interested in making money. I just wanted to make something that everybody could come to because, frankly, on a Friday night, there's not a hell of a lot to do in suburbia.
Right.
And so I was like, hey, let's make something cool happen. And so
So you're
that's
trying to
how
wrangle
that's
up Glass Tiger and make some money off of it or
oh,
something
I
like
wish
that?
Glass Tiger. No, it was like student high school bands, David. It
Oh,
was
okay.
like, I drive around and go find who could play and try and sell tickets. And it was a great experience, actually. The only guys who made money on that, by the way, were my buddies who were the bouncers. And I put them there strategically because there was like a fire limit. And of course, no one wants to buy a ticket to a high school rock concert 2 weeks before it, but the day of, everybody wants to go because nothing else to do.
Right.
So we had way more people who wanted to come in than I think the fire code allowed. And so I told the guys, I said, look, you can resell the tickets, you can get as many people in. I just want to know about it. So we had packed houses, and they seemed to be pretty happy at the end of the day.
Well, you have had a lifelong interest in music, and as you
Yeah.
mentioned, you're in a recording studio right now, which is why your acoustics are so beautiful.
Yep.
And I was reading something about you, and it's highly unusual for people. Well, highly unusual to meet people who have a particular interest in the bass guitar. And and normally most people who listen to music don't even pay any attention to who is playing the bass
Right.
guitar or what is being played. But not only do you like the bass guitar, you have a favorite bass guitar player, Pino
Right.
Paladino,
Well,
right?
you've done your homework. This is pretty impressive. Yes, I do. I love Pino Palladino.
So how? Like how?
How do I love him, or
Yeah,
how
like
do why?
what makes you get into his bass playing in
Sure,
particular? I mean, I've listened
sure,
to a lot of
sure.
it over the years, but
No,
whether
no, no
I could
problem.
pick out a Pino Palladino bass line from
Yeah,
another one, I don't know that I
yeah,
could.
yeah. Okay, fair question. I did not expect us to go here, but I love it. Okay, so Pino Palladino is extraordinarily versatile bass player. Has played with everybody from sort of the Paul Jackson early era to was the Who's bassist. Has played with like virtually everyone. But the stuff that I loved this guy for was two eras. One was he recorded with an artist called D'Angelo, who is kind of one of the sort of foundational artists of
Messiah.
neo soul. Yeah, exactly. And he recorded on his first album, Voodoo, or second album, Voodoo, and that sound of Pino Palladini playing specifically with a drummer called Questlove, who many people might know from, I think he's on Jimmy Kimmel, but he was in the Roots. He was the drummer for the
Yeah.
Roots, and they played together. And there was a particular type of sound and feel to that, which is very specific. Your bass player, if you're listening, it's behind the beat. He's just a tiny, like 132nd, 164th behind the beat, and it makes it have this incredible relaxed and loose feel. So that sound, I mean, it spawned tons of neo soul. So whether it was Eric Badu or Nas or Common, a lot of them took that sound, and sometimes Pino was playing. And then secondly, Pino then went on and played with John Mayer in the John Mayer Trio, and also fantastic playing there. So I don't want to take over the whole thing with my obsession with Pino Paladino. I also love a guy named Joe Dart, who's in the Wolfpack, and there's a lot of bases. But yeah, thank you for
Right.
pairing that out. You can tell it makes me happy.
Well, I don't know if this is going to diminish him in your eyes,
Yes.
but along with the drummer for and the keyboard player for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Pino
Yeah.
Palladino is the band for a recent and quite exceptional Elton John Brandy Carlisle album called Who Believes in Angels.
That wouldn't diminish it at all. Like I said, Pino's played with everybody. I mean, every single major player out there, this guy has played with. And I'm sure most people listening, just like you, like I don't even know what the bass playing is. They have heard songs with Pino Palladino in the background, and probably love them for that. He's got
Yeah.
incredible hook and feel.
So let's call this one a culmination. The federal government has just announced their decision on the item we've been talking about for months and months and months here. The feds upheld the CRTC's framework that allows wholesale fiber access for internet services. Cue the celebratory hand clapping and confetti emojis. I added that little techno outburst because it's how our presenting sponsor Telus must be feeling. You listeners know they supported the CRTC's decision right from the beginning. They're grateful for the government's leadership here because it reinforces Canada's commitment to real competition, consumer choice, innovation, and, so relevant in these times, nation-building investment. It also sends a strong signal to Canadian businesses and investors that our regulatory system is transparent and stable, providing the certainty they need to invest and grow. Back to Telus, to wind this up, they are passionate about building national infrastructure and technology because it benefits consumers and increases the productivity and innovation of our private and public sectors. And they'll continue to invest in helping address the challenges of our time: digital inequality, the responsible development of AI, the transformation of our healthcare system, environmental sustainability, and food safety and security for all Canadians. TELUS also just unveiled a new brand promise. 4 words you can read pretty much anywhere you see their logo. We're always building Canada. Powerful stuff, particularly now, and they mean it. Why were you so upset about the increase in the capital gains tax?
Oh, I don't think I was that upset. I think
Really?
I
Because I thought
was.
you were, and I thought the whole community you're from was really upset about that thing, and that it was sort of a break point with Trudeau for the tech community.
I think that was a theory. I heard the podcast you did with David, and I think that's what he identified. I don't think that's quite accurate, to be honest, David. Um, I think certainly it was a catalytic moment for a lot of folks where they were like, "Hey, this is probably not a good decision." And it to me, I think it was uh, emblematic or symbolic for people of not quite recognizing what really drives a growing economy and what drives us to have an innovation economy, which is something that I think the former government talked a lot about wanting to have, but not quite connecting the dots on, one of the requirements of what you needed in order to get there. So, but specifically, I did disagree with the decision to raise the capital gains. I think no policies in isolation, but I think in general, we have to be thinking about what are we doing to create Canada as the number one place that entrepreneurs want to be and build their companies and grow, right? And in particular, Canadians, like just how do we make sure Canadians want to build a company that's great, that becomes another massive employer, creates a lot of jobs, innovation, grows our GDP, and do it here. And it's certainly not the only factor, but incentives do matter, and I think that we have to be very careful when we make changes like that.
But over the years, and you know what, to be honest, I'm trying to understand this. I'm not trying to
Yeah,
use
yeah,
this as a
sure.
gotcha thing. I'm genuinely
No,
trying to
no, cool, cool.
understand the mind of an entrepreneur and
Okay.
how this affects it. Right? Because as I looked at it, I would say, well, fuck, I think people, when I think of Jeff Bezos sitting in his garage trying to invent Amazon, I don't think he knew to the decimal point how much money he was going to make off that. And if you told him any version of what he's made, he would have gone ahead and done it anyway. So where does something like a capital gains tax increase affect entrepreneurship and innovation?
Okay, sure. And I don't think you're trying to be gotcha at all, David. I want to try and explain it as well as best I understand it. First,
Mm,
I'm going to talk about the point I made, which is incentives matter, right? You can't necessarily point to an individual and say they knew about this. You're talking about in aggregate across the economy. So whether we do this all the time, we increase incentives for people through the tax code to either do behaviors or not do behaviors. And so, and I'll give you an example, which is, winning lotteries. Hundreds of people become millionaires in Canada by winning lotteries. It's a wonderful thing. No one's mad at those people, by the way. I don't think anyone gets upset when they become a millionaire. But
mm,
turns out there's no tax on winning a lottery in Canada. You become a millionaire and you don't pay any tax. There's no capital gains. There's nothing. It's I think under Canadian tax code, it's considered a windfall. And so then you say, well, wait, that is that fair? Like we want everyone to pay their fair share, and if you become a multimillionaire overnight, shouldn't you be paying tax? If you go to the lottery people, you say, well, why don't we do that? They say, oh no, no, less people will play the lottery if the lottery payouts are lower. And you're like, but no one really is thinking about that individual payoff. Yeah, that's true. But in aggregate, all the people playing the game, less people if they say, hey, this week it's 3 million, but next week it's 6 million. I mean, how many of us listening say, oh, I'm not, once it gets past this
mm,
number, I'm going to buy that. Now, it's not exactly the same thing, but I think we have to recognize that you've got thousands and hundreds of thousands of folks who are making choices about what do I do every day? How do I make a decision? And I believe that the tax incentive of your outcome makes a difference. It makes a difference economically in the same way that the lottery makes a difference. Am I going to make this choice? And I think it's not just about the Jeff Bezos of the world, right? It's hey, do I want to go be an employer? Or do I want to quit my job at a big Canadian corporate company, risk my house, and take a mortgage out? And people do. They sit down and do a spreadsheet and they say, oh my gosh, look, if I discount what the outcome is going to be, I have a lot better chance of making some money with this capital gains because I'm taking a risk to go start something. And I think that's where it gets back to the question of what incentives do we want? We want people, I believe, especially in the world that we live in today, especially in the described crisis that we're in, we want them to be entrepreneurial. We want them to take chances with capital. Now, where I frankly have a lot of sympathy for people who are upset about who wanted the capital gains increase is I think there is a difference between someone starting a business, working for a decade, hiring employees, mortgaging their house, going through all that effort, building something new that creates a product or service that the world has, and then having one time to sell that company versus someone buying stock one day and selling it after they made 20% return the next day. I don't think those are the same economic behavior. They get captured under the tax the same way. We probably could be more targeted about that. The stuff that I care about is the entrepreneurial incentive. Let me say one last thing, David. There's also vibes. There's the bully pulpit. There's animal spirits. There's all sorts of words that we describe the non-monetary things. And, economists, philosophers try to put words on them, but it's, let's just call it vibes. When you're an entrepreneur, you want to be in an environment. I'm talking about a country that thinks you're a good person, thinks that what you're doing by building a company is actually contributing to society. And that's
mm.
something I strongly believe. I think we might make a mistake as a society if the signal we send is, you're kind of a greedy person if you want to start a business and make money. No, that is actually a very, very good thing. And we want to have the right vibes. We want our young people graduating from school, graduating from Waterloo, from University of Toronto, from University of Calgary, to say, I can serve this country and be a great Canadian by starting a business and succeeding. That's a good thing. Now, don't get me wrong. Let's go back to your example. Are people not starting companies because they think people might not like them? I don't know. I don't think so. But if you ask me in the whole, why do I think that matters? I think those are some of the reasons it matters.
Right.
Does that help? Like, I know you want to
It does.
understand. Am
It
I am
does. It
I
really helps. Now
articulating?
let me tell you my side of it, which really troubles me because
Sure.
I liked the move when the government did it because I think inequality is at unacceptable levels in Canada, and we're going to have to find a way to have the economy, could be government, could be the way we structure the private sector, to distribute income in a different way than it is currently distributing it. But the real inequality is less in income now than it is in wealth, and in accumulated wealth. And so I think at some point we're going to have to find a way to get at some wealth. And how does a person do that and keep social peace, um, and keep a vibrant economy at the same time? I think this is a real
Well,
challenge.
well, no, but I think you're confusing. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Continue, David. I'm
No, I'm
sorry.
done. Go ahead.
Well, I think there's a causality thing, which is I think social peace comes when you have a vibrant economy. I think you might have it backwards. I think that if you want people to be feeling good, they want to be employed, they want to have a job, they want to feel they're contributing to something meaningful. And in order for that to happen, you have to have a vibrant, dynamic economy, especially today. I think, we have to, everything in this conversation has to be bracketed, which the world we are living in is radically changing faster than probably we have before. And I think bracketing everything about Build Canada or my interest in this is specifically about the fact that I think we're entering a time period where change is going to happen very quickly. And it's going to change almost all the fundamental underlying assumptions of how Canada exists, what Canada does, what we are as a nation, because we have to figure out a new, version 3.0. I think we've done this many times. We've reinvented ourselves, but I think that we have to do that right now. I don't think the answer necessarily is income inequality. I think it's growth. I think the answer is how do we grow the economy so everybody can do it? And I'm not talking about trickle down stuff. I'm saying small businesses, mid-sized businesses,
But now
and
I'm
yes,
going
there
to
are large
interrupt you.
businesses.
There's a
Please,
shitload
please
of
go ahead.
evidence. There's a shitload of evidence for the past 35 or so years that the growth and rising GDP is not distributed the way it used to be distributed. And so rising tides are not lifting all boats, right? There is a massive accumulation of wealth at the top end. And people at the bottom end are doing the same or worse than they've ever done.
I think that's first of all, I don't want to quibble because about your evidence, because I'd argue that there are other academics who are reputable who would argue that that is not as strong as you think that evidence is. But I think neither you or I are professional economists, and probably not the best place to take the conversation. Let's just say it's an area that's hotly disputed, and it's a fair point. Um, I don't think the maths. Like, I don't think even if you confiscated wealth in companies, you would be able to get to the level of equality that you want to pay for the costs that are ahead for us as a nation. The only answer has to be to become more productive and grow. And like, here's the thing. I think we use words. The words that we need are, when people go to the store these days, they want to buy Canadian. They want to buy a Canadian product. Why? Because they intuitively understand that when you buy Canadian mustard or Canadian barbecue, that it is helping a Canadian employer. And that Canadian employer employs people.
Do you
So
know that there's
when
no
you
fucking
say,
Canadian pickles, by the way? There are no Canadian pickles.
my grandmother made great pickles. I don't know what you're
Yeah,
talking
I
about.
bet you she
Yeah.
did. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe there isn't. Maybe there isn't a Canadian pickles. But my point I'm trying to make is that, like, we are all in this together. And so if you're trying to get me to say, like, we have to think about how do we make sure everybody succeeds, I am fundamentally agreeing with you. I just don't think that pure redistribution will get us to what the outcome you want it to be, especially today. Especially in the way that, like, what are some of the reasons why wealth is concentrating, in particular, by the way, in the United States, is, hey, we're living in a different type of economics these days, right? We're living in a digital economic world where wealth is accumulating in different ways. Now, the question is, how can we make sure that everybody is benefiting it? The best answer I can think of is to allow Canadians to be awesome, allow them to be great entrepreneurs, remove the friction of them becoming great exporters, creating great products for each other. And maybe you feel like I'm too passionate about that, but I've seen that. That's my lived experience, both myself and friends and family, and having invested in dozens, probably 100 now, Canadian companies. Like, I see what they can do, and I understand that they have barriers. I just want us to give us our best shot of trying to grow the opportunity that exists in the country and doing it effectively. I think there's another thing, which is, like, how can we take advantage of the technology that's out there to deliver the services that we want for our people, whether it's healthcare, education, or just government services, effectively,
Right.
right? How can we do that? And frankly, spend less money doing that if we can.
Okay. So, in these days of angst and heartburn over access to U.S. markets, and I do not want for a moment to underplay the importance of that question, let me focus for a moment on a subject that might act as some relief for the troubled Canadian mind. I am speaking of the mighty port of Prince Rupert in northern British Columbia. Those of you who are geography mavens will know that Rupert is the closest port in North America to Asian markets. The rest of you should go consult a map. As Canada strives to diversify its exports, one of our government's explicit goals, Rupert will be a big deal. It already is. And our sponsor, CN, is the main player at the port of Prince Rupert. Over the past decade, CN has plowed more than $1.5 billion into its northern corridor, meaning the railway branch off its main transcontinental line that heads off toward Rupert. In the past year, CN hauled 50,000 carloads of liquefied natural gas to the AltaGas and Pembina export terminals at Rupert, headed for Asian markets. Getting LNG to Tidewater is key to Western Canada's economy. CN Railroaders also shipped 5.9 million tons of grain to export terminals at Rupert, along with shipments of coal. The container vessel giants Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd are also shifting cargo away from congested ports in the United States, rerouting through Rupert. And CN, knowing opportunity when it sees it, is building, modernizing systems, expanding yard capacity, ensuring Rupert takes its rightful place as a crucial gateway and trade colossus in the decades to come. How's that for some good news in this year of living uncertainly? So I really want, because I think you are in an entirely different part of the world than I'm in, and I think the world is changing stunningly quickly, in
Yep.
terms of geopolitics, in terms of the United States, in terms of the world order, in terms of what economics works and what economics doesn't work, all kinds of things. I see it, and at my age, by the way, I have a particular relationship with change, which is not that positive. And you may have a more positive one, and younger people even a more positive one than that. But I'm interested from your vantage point, what makes you think that change is accelerating?
Oh, sure. Uh, well, the the short answer is I taught a class for almost 10 years on this particular topic, and I've invested for almost 20 years in what I would call exponential technologies. I think the fundamental underlying thing is this thing called Moore's Law, which you may have heard of. And it was
I
basically
have.
Gordon Moore founded
Mhm.
Intel. It's not like a law of physics, it's a law of human production, basically. And he said, pretty much from here on in, every 18 months, the power of computer chips will double and the price will go in half. And human beings are not good at understanding the implications of that because we live in a linear world. AX plus BX equals CX. Like something, goes up a little bit, goes up a little bit, and we just continue. And that's how we kind of understand the world. But exponential curves are different from that. What they are is it looks like nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden they start to geometrically grow really, really quickly. If you've ever sat with your retirement planner and talked about compound interest, it's pretty much the same thing. They have these great charts that by the end of your life, you're going to have lots of money. Don't worry, right?
Right.
Keep saving. So I think a long time ago, like 20 years ago, when I was at school, I mentioned I went to school in the States. I took this class with a famous venture capitalist and a famous academic. And basically, they laid out this thesis that, hey, the underlying computing power that we have in the world is just going to keep on getting more and more powerful and stronger. And because of that, all these other associated technologies, the internet, for example, will also start connecting way more people, billions of people, and they will have cheaper and cheaper computing power, right? It's hard to imagine, but the entire planet is walking around with a supercomputer in their pocket, right? The phone in your pocket is hundreds, thousands, millions of times more powerful than the computers that you were used to send the Saturn V to space, right? And everybody has one. And more importantly, another exponential technology, cloud. Everyone's connected to the cloud. And the prediction was that, hey, these things would start turning everything into software problems, whether it was genomics, whether it was manufacturing, whether it was medicine. And hey, this is going to seem slow, and then it's going to start to get really weird. So I mentioned I taught a class. So about 10 years ago at the U of T, University of Toronto Law School, I started being curious about this question. What is going to happen to our society? What is going to happen to our public policy, our governance? When this starts, if the predictions are right, what's going to happen? And also, personally, I started to invest in quantum computing companies and AI companies, um, many of them Canadian. Um, and so we're now at that phase after 8 years where when I first started teaching that course with a guy named Ben Allery. Ben, by the way, is one of the top tax professors in the country, but he's also the CEO of Blue Jay Legal, which just raised, I think, $180 million, a Canadian champion, the number one tax law AI company in the world. So we taught this class, and in the beginning, David, most of our time was trying to convince the students that we weren't like crazy and like coming to class high because we were talking about, computers that could talk and robots that would drive around. We would talked about how, transportation, like autonomous cars were a real thing that you could see coming, and they just didn't buy it. By the end of the class, which we stopped about a year and a half ago, that was never the conversation because the students already could see this stuff happening. They were starting to use ChatGPT and they could see the implications that this is going to be pretty amazing. Anyhow, long answer to your question. That's when I started to see it. I started to see it in an academic context and teaching it and asking questions about what we would do as a society as this started to happen. And then separately, as a technologist, as an entrepreneur, I was involved in seeing some of these companies go from, academic ideas to real businesses. And I think we're in inning two right now, inning one, maybe. We are still early in the rapid change that I believe is about to come.
Well, and it will continue to accelerate in pace, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it builds on itself, right? So as more and more people have these computers, then more and more people can go and use them, right? So if someone had invented ChatGPT in 2000, for example, there were only 80 million people on the internet, and no one had processing power that could run that thing. The amount of compute required would have taken more than all the compute on the planet. It wouldn't have mean anything. But today, they launch it and 800 million people are using it on a weekly basis now
Yeah.
inside of a year and a half. That's one of the fastest growing products in all time. So yeah, all these things are, and this was the thesis that we've been thinking about, which is accelerating exponentials, that each of these things would start to make the others faster in its effect on society and its effect on change.
Okay.
And
So
by the way, one thing I want to say, because I think sometimes people misinterpret folks like me who are involved in technology as being like, endlessly boisterous and cheery about all the good things that'll happen. Like, no, not necessarily. Like, I'm fully aware that there are downsides with technology. Can't read history, which I do a lot, and not be aware of that. Um, what I am is, I think, a
read
realist about,
history. Watch The
yeah.
Terminator.
I have a funny story. I actually got to have lunch once with James Cameron and a couple of the world's top AI scientists. And James Cameron was like, "Hey, you're never going to create humans. You're never going to create art. You're never going to create the spirit of what it means to make people." And the AI scientists were like, "No, no, no, you're totally wrong. We got it figured out." And I
Yeah.
turned to him and I said, "Hey, man, great Canadian, by the way, James Cameron." And I said, "Hey,
Yeah.
aren't you the guy who created Terminator? Like, didn't you say, it's unstoppable, it'll never stop?" And he's like, "Man, I was just trying to make a movie. I was just trying to tell a story. I wasn't trying to predict the future."
Well, all of us 60-year-olds who grew up on that movie are just waiting as we watch AI. We're just waiting for Skynet to go live. That's all. We're just,
Yeah, but
that's
you gotta there's Star Trek also. There's a positive,
yeah.
happy future with computers and robots, right? And it's
Yeah.
a bit of both. Yeah,
Yeah.
the point I was trying to make is it's just about, for me, it's more about just not normative, it's positive. It's like, this is what's going to happen. I mean, we can talk about why Canada is a small country in a very, or mid-sized country in a very large world where, in particular in AI, there are just massive geopolitical, geostrategic, military implications of this stuff. And so for us, we have to think about a strategy of, this is coming, this is going to come for how we run our business, our society, our government. How do we best adapt and take advantage of that so that we prosper in this change? Because I think, being scared of it and saying we're going to stop it, we're going to slow it, we're going to manage it, I don't think that's viable. I just don't think that's a realistic outcome for what we can see happening. It would have been like Canada saying, "Well, we see the automobile coming. We're just not allowing cars in Canada. We're going to wait and see on that." I mean, we didn't. We became a huge part of manufacturing cars. That's why we have an auto industry that, until Mr. Trump decided to take a wrecking ball to it, was working really well as a job creator and as a integrator of our economies.
Yeah. I think a lot of people wonder about how the ethical considerations get worked into AI and all the decisions. I mean, I think about that, for instance, with autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
Anybody who drives an automobile makes a lot of judgment calls, um, and based on our history as humans, um, what will that car do in those circumstances? Okay.
Well, yeah, I think,
I'm
David, I
not
mean, the
asking you to
cool,
answer that question. I'm saying
no,
those are the kind of
no,
things I think about.
but I think it's a great thing to think about, because I think it points to what I believe is part of the answer for what Canada has to do. Because you can just think about problems forever. And trust me, I think about it. I teach classes and stuff like that. But you know how
Yeah.
you really learn? You go do it. You have to build it. There's this amazing book about the history of the locomotive. Like, you think about the invention of the locomotive as like one person who did. It's not. It was thousands of people across the United Kingdom, mostly competing, and France a bit, competing to tinker and improve and figure out, like, how do we deal with this? How do we manage this? How do we make this thing real? And so I think the answer for us as we think about these systems is, you start building them. You build them in small scale. You build them in ways where you could fail, but you have to do them. I think there's a lot of talking and not enough doing in our mindset about how we react to this stuff. And frankly, I think the best strategy when you're faced with this change coming is greet the future when it arrives. Tell everyone else who didn't decide to figure it out what you figured out. And that means getting started, doing it now, adopting these products, building the companies. Because if you don't do that, some other country's going to do it. We're just going to end up like, look, today the Canadian government at all levels, municipal, provincial, is an overwhelming buyer of Microsoft, Google, and American technology. We don't buy that much from Canadian companies. Well, I'm like, hey, we invented AI in Canada, truly. Why aren't we taking advantage of it to change how we offer services to our citizens and figure out the answer to your questions about ethics? You can theorize. I mean, the very, very first thing I ever did that got me into this, actually, I should have answered. When I was at Western, I was a research associate for a fantastic law professor. He's unfortunately passed now, Ian Kerr. And, that's what got me into thinking about the philosophy and ethics of what do you do about technological change. He was one of the first in Canada pioneers in doing that. And I think my answer to him, and my answer always was, you got to go build this stuff. Back to your question about autonomous. And you know why, David? We don't need to ponder your question about autonomous cars anymore. The data pretty much is in. As far as I can tell, autonomous cars are much safer than humans. So you're right, a human might have their life in judgment, but if we look at the data, and maybe this is similar to your decision at the beginning, if you look at the aggregate data, these autonomous cars are going to kill a lot less people. Right now, you got to remember 30 to 40,000 people in states are killed in car accidents. That is an enormous tragedy, and we have a technology that could solve it. We should be like, how do we go as fast as we can as Canadians? And I'm serious, like we worry about bike lanes. We have a lot of Sturm and Drang about that. And like I walk and bike. I don't want to die in a car accident in Toronto. But if you really want to deal with people dying, let's figure out how we stop making people drive cars, figure out how we make them autonomous so that we have a lot less Canadians dying on the roads. Period. Full stop.
Remember a few weeks ago, I told you about a lot, and I mean a lot, of paper being used in the investment industry. The reason for that is paper first regulations. If you don't remember, because you've been totally consumed by how beautifully the Riders are playing this season, don't worry. Our sponsor, Fidelity Investments Canada, is here to remind you. It's estimated the investment industry uses 900 tons of paper annually to meet industry regulations. That's equivalent to 57 CN towers stacked on top of one another. These regulations were written a long, long time ago, and they meant well to keep investors informed about how their investments are performing. You Herle Burly-ites, streaming this pod on your 5G-enabled phone, don't need any reminder. The world has moved on, and so have investor preferences. According to various public opinion polling studies, anywhere between 71 to 89% of investors, a supermajority, want to receive their investment information digitally. So maybe it's time to modernize and update the current regulations and move to digital first, to do what investors want, while at the same time protecting paper reporting for those who prefer it in that format. Fidelity thinks so. They're committed to delivering better customer service and keeping investors informed about their investments and how they're performing in exactly the way they want it. I'm having so much fun bantering with you that I am not going to get to all the things I need to ask you about.
Hey, let's do speed round, so because I know you have questions. I'll try and go through them.
I'm going to show some discipline here.
All right. I'll be disciplined too.
I'm going to say, in this changing world, what needs to change about the way Canada's economy is currently working? What does Canada need to change? And I know that a person could go to Build Canada and get a bunch of ideas, but I'm kind of interested in, I'm not asking you to roll out policy, just in a large.
I think there's a few things at a high level. Okay. First high level thing is we have to become more dynamic. Canada's deal from our foundation has been, especially as an offset to the States, that we will have a much more protected economy. And you see this today. Like, look at our banks, our airlines, our education sector, our healthcare sector, transport, rail, books. I mean, you name it. We have non-market barriers to entry and competition. And over time, I think that is the root cause of a lot of productivity, because people don't innovate for the goodness of their heart. They innovate because they want to sell more products and services, and they don't want to lose customers. They got to have the coolest thing and the best way of doing it. So we need a more dynamic, more competitive economy. Number one, I think that's incredibly important. And number two, we have to open our mindset to become a trading nation. We have to have an identity. Like, our identity has to shift from being what I love about Canada, a caring, sharing nation that takes care of its weakest, that doesn't leave people behind. But it also is a country that has a heritage, a fantastic heritage of building kick-ass companies, building amazing infrastructure, building amazing things under pressure. We have to reclaim that as Canadians and remember that that's our mission for the next decade, 20 years. We got if you don't like what's happening with the power being exercised against us, then we need to have more power on our own and we need more economic power. That comes from selling amazing products and services to the world. So at a high level, that has to be part of the answer to how we get there. I'll go to a third one. For a long time, we have done a lot of what I will call supply side support. Provincial, federal governments, we need more entrepreneurship. Okay, let's supply more venture capital. Let's supply more entrepreneurs, fund the schools. Let's supply more loans to people. But what other countries, in particular, I'll talk about the United States, but not just them, who have great innovation economies, they think about the demand side. They think about their military and their government as buyers of local technology, and they do a very good job of it. I mean, Silicon Valley is lots of things, but Silicon Valley is 100% a military project if you go back to the start of it. I mean, that's where it came from. And the government was a buyer, and the government was a buyer that was willing to take risks. This is really important. So I think the next thing that at a high level, we have to get a much more responsive, risk-taking, fast-moving government. I really believe that. And I think we can do that. We saw in COVID, people could move quickly when they were under crisis. I would argue that the crisis we're under now is as big or worse. So we have to move really quickly.
Nobody understands incentives better than a business person understands
Yes,
incentives.
yes, yes.
Why are governments not risk takers, Daniel?
Well, first of all, I'll say one thing.
What incents them
Hang
to
on.
be?
I mean, David, one thing I'm also pretty good at is knowing what I don't know, and I know a hell of a lot less than I know. And so I've not worked in government, and I bet you have a better answer for what it is. But here's what I can tell you. I've heard from people who have worked there, and I've been good at asking a lot of questions. The incentives are borked. I hear a few things. You hear the Westminster style of government. So this idea that of ministerial accountability to Parliament means you have lots of balkanization in the government and not rationalization, in particular around software, IT systems, where we could do a much better job of managing spend and also bringing the best technology and making better services as a Canadian. Like most Canadians, I bet would prefer to have one login for their government all the time. But for a bunch of reasons, we don't do that. So number one is incentive there. I think two, there's a gotcha culture, a media culture, a parliamentary culture, right?
Of
Like, let's be
course.
candid. Our and this is a good example. Like our Westminster system, like the question period, the idea that was not designed to be 5 minutes, 30-second sound bites on the internet. It was supposed to be for debate, but it's turned into this totally different thing. So the system, because of the technology we have today for media, is not responding the same way and makes gotcha of like, oh, look, this project you worked on where you took a risk and tried something, if it's screwed up, let's pillory you. Where
Well, totally.
instead we
That's
should be like,
exactly
it
what happens,
happened.
right? What
Yeah,
would be happening to
yeah.
NASA if they were crashing as many spacecraft as Elon Musk
Bingo.
is?
Exactly. You got it. And I think, people, there's lots to not like about Elon Musk, but you cannot deny that they took a totally different approach that would be nonsensical to most people, which is let's blow it up and see what happens. And let's learn from that mistake and manage the risk. That has put them, I mean, we could spend a lot of time on that. It is so far ahead of other nations in terms of space launch capacity. Just a small number. I think there's about 8,000 man-made objects in space. 6,000 of them are SpaceX. They have
Yeah.
launched more than every other nation state, one company, because they figured this out. Now, to your point, that required experimentation and thinking differently. So we have to have a media that allows for mistakes. Look, let me give you an example that comes from a great Build Canada memo, just got posted. And it goes to your question about what we need to do. I think military spending, as we are amping up our GDP percentage, we're going to spend a lot of money on the military. And this is an amazing opportunity for us to have better kit for our warriors, but also to build a domestic industry of companies that can supply them. But the current procurement system extraordinarily risk averse. I mean, it takes 16 years to procure a major weapon system. I've had very senior military officials tell me it's completely borked. And so, one of the proposals, a Canadian who had worked at building one of the biggest American kind of military startups, he said, look, you've got to devolve authority down to the base commanders. You've got to give them a $25 million budget to try things. And he acknowledges, yes, it's going to be some wastage. Yes, we might make the wrong decisions. But this process of thinking that we can intellectualize everything and figure everything else in advance, the world is changing too fast for that. You've got to, and in this case in particular, You only have to look at the Ukraine. I mean, we have seen multiple waves of innovation in warfare in the time span of that war. It's completely shifted from an artillery-based war to a drone-based war. The Ukraine is producing something like 200 to 300,000 drones a month right now. And they are completely innovating how they are deployed, how they're used, and that's changing tactics. So you've got to think about if we're going to go spend a bunch of money to have Canadian champions build our military up, can we go do it the old way, or do we have to adapt to a new model of a world that's changing really, really quickly? That's a great example of one. Hopefully, those are a few answers that are at least specific. People told me you like to be specific, David. So I'm hopefully trying to be specific for
Yeah,
you.
no, it was great. Great. I want to talk to you about, you know what? I want to talk to you about politics for a second because I like to talk about politics.
Sure.
And I now I want you to talk about the community you come from, the tech entrepreneurial community writ
Yep.
large, not yourself. I don't even know what your politics are. Don't know anything about it. But my
Sure.
perception of the community would be that they were enthusiastic about Trudeau when he was elected.
Fair. Fair.
Why?
Yep.
Why?
I think the same reason most people in Canada were enthusiastic. He was young, he was fresh, he had a vision, and he spent time courting the tech industry. I got to go to conferences and speaking events, and the Prime Minister's office wants to hear your opinion on these things. And yeah, that's good. That's cool. That was excellent. Um, I don't know whether that got followed through, candidly.
But
And
why not? Like,
it's a
why would
shame.
they waste the Prime Minister's time to actually spend time with you, listening to what you have to say, and then do nothing about that?
I mean, isn't David, again, this is where you know more than me, but isn't isn't that part of the deal? Like I mean, I do want politicians to listen to everybody. And maybe the choice is, hey, we don't like the trade-offs that are required for that to happen. And to be fair, I think a number of things were done. I think, though, going back to my point about government as a demand side, not much was done there. And then more generally, my point about the bully pulpit, my point about like, what's the vibe? Is this a country? I mean, I had a chance to talk to the prime minister, just like thousands of people talk to him. And I said, look, if you want to make this country the promise of what it could be, we have to become an entrepreneurial paradise. We have to be the best place for a young person to start a business. And again, I'm not saying a tech business. I mentor this kid. I'm up in the Kawartha Lakes right now, and I'm trying to help him start a landscaping business and get his company, get himself started in life. He just graduated from Guelph. He's a terrific kid. I don't want him to leave, and he's thinking about leaving Canada. That's not good for us, right? And I think the way that we talk, the way that we prioritize what's important. So, what I would go back to our prior prime ministers, I don't think he believed that growth was the number one thing. I think he thought other things were the number one thing. And in big organizations, you cannot have six top priorities. You can have one,
Right.
maybe two. And I don't think growth was the number one thing. I think that's the simple answer.
Okay. So then it appeared as the election neared, and this was the subtext of the conversation I had with David from the Logic around the time about Build Canada and about a bunch of other things. The enthusiasm seemed to have shifted to Polyev. And what confused me about that is that he seems as strong an opponent of industrial policy as exists in the country. He's a low tax, low regulation guy. But in terms of a lot of the proactive industrial policy things that people on Build Canada were talking about, he seemed to be the politician in the country least likely to be interested in those things
Yeah.
because he
Well,
doesn't believe in
so
playing favorites. And he doesn't celebrate success the way you're talking about it. He celebrates the average working person. He doesn't celebrate the person that became
I,
super. He doesn't
I,
celebrate you, Daniel. I'm telling you that. I've seen it. You're not the person he
I
talks about in his
that
speeches.
that's okay. That's okay. I'm fine. I'm okay with that. I mean, well, look, I think everybody has their own perceptions. I think that there was a fair amount of here's actually what I think actually ended up happening in a very positive way, which is both parties ended up articulating a Build Canada platform. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Our prime minister took a lot of policies in a great way, I think, from the Conservatives, and so that is what was important to us. And back to your question about Build Canada. Look, just to say the thing, there are a few members who support Build Canada who have very loud bully pulpits on Twitter, and I think everybody made a misinterpretation that Build Canada was those folks. It just wasn't. It wasn't from day one. There are lots, just to say it, there are lots of people who supported Carney. There were liberals, people who donate money. There were lots of people who were in this group who published memos who were supporters of liberals. There are a few who were supporters of conservatives. And frankly, that's a good thing. We wanted Build Canada to be nonpartisan. What we're trying to create with this, through the actions that we do. And it's not just the policy memos. We have got hundreds of volunteers now, and it's growing like 10% every week. It's really amazing. Young people are resonating with what Build Canada was talking about. I mean, David, it's honestly the craziest thing. It was meant to be a small little side project that I was like, hey, why don't we put this together? We can use AI to help these folks get their story out, and we'll get it out. And then what happened is young people started writing us and saying, can I get a Build Canada hat? Can I get a t-shirt? I'm like, why are young people interested in a bunch of policy wonk memos? And what it was the way that we talked about our optimistic, patriotic view of we can be a prosperous country. And that we were not just hand waving. The memos were very specific. Do this very specific thing. We've got one coming out today from Zita Cobb, an incredible Canadian entrepreneur. She, made a ton, but then she gave back and created Shorefast and the Fogo Island Inn. If you've ever been out to Fogo Island, that's hugely because of Rita's incredible work. Yeah, yeah,
I hear nothing
incredible,
good.
right?
I hear nothing but good things about it, but I suspect I'll only ever have to hear about it,
Yeah,
unless
it's expensive to go there.
it's
No, no, no,
kind
but
of place you go for if the company's paying the bill. But
Yeah, yeah. But the point about Rita is that she just put out a whole thing about regional airport infrastructure and how if we want to grow our country, we have incredible tourism assets, but it's very hard to get there. So the point is, it's a very specific memo that the government could do something on.
right.
What I thought was weird was young people were like resonating with this. And that's why Build Canada continued. What we're trying to do is create a constituency for growth that cuts across parties. So back to your question, like I just yeah, I mean, I don't know. You tell me what your pollster. You tell me some people support one guy, some people support the other guy. Um, there's a great quote from Deng Xiaoping when he was trying to explain China's move from pure communism to a market-based economy. He said, I think it was black cat, white cat, don't care as long as it kills rats. So, red party, blue party, don't care as long as it grows the economy, makes us more prosperous.
Right. So if I could do an Annie Hall, Woody Allen move right now and tap Justin Trudeau and bring him in here to this conversation,
Okay, okay,
he
yeah.
might say to you, Daniel, the share price of Shopify in the period of time that I was prime minister exploded. And you and Toby and all those people became very, very wealthy while I was the prime minister. So how could my policies have been so anti-business?
I think that is probably. I think that if it was actually Justin Trudeau who admitted that he had sort of math phobia or some sort of math problem, I would say you are confusing correlation with causation, Mr. Prime Minister. I don't think it was you being Prime Minister that was driving Shopify's share price. I think Shopify's share price grew because it's a lot of the things we're talking about. It's a dynamic, incredibly customer focused organization.
But could be that
And
in Canada. Could be that
and
in
it could,
Canada.
and it was, yeah, but did things very differently. Did not take a lot, did not take government subsidy. It was just about being the best in the world. It was about being globally ambitious to build the best company in the world. And frankly, there's something else. There's actually a subtext to this, which is important. I looked it up this morning. The GDP of Shopify, which is the total amount of revenue of all the companies on Shopify, is about 18% of the entire Canadian economy at this point. It's astonishing how much economic activity, how many entrepreneurs, millions of people who have jobs and livelihoods and employ others because of that company creating. And what did they do? The fundamental metric was, hey, people want to be entrepreneurs. Let's talk about entrepreneurship in a positive way. Let's tell them that they can go do this. That's, if you want to look at Shopify marketing, it's all that. Inspiring people that they too can go and create a business. And number two, building an amazing product, but in a very specific way. It was there are so many frictions to being an entrepreneur. It is such a hard and lonely journey. Why don't we make it easier? At every step, let's just figure out what's really hard. Okay, I'm setting up an online store. Let's make it easy to set up an online store. Oh, you want to take payments? Okay, we'll set up a payment system that's a couple of clicks. You don't have to go talk to your bank. You don't have to go do that. Oh, I need to borrow money. The bank doesn't understand you. We understand you. We'll lend you money. Oh, I need to do shipping and the post office doesn't want to give you a rate because you're small. We will go in bulk and order from you. Imagine if our government at all level took that mindset. How do we just remove friction from people who want to build and grow? How do we just get out of their way as fast as we can? I'm not saying don't regulate. I'm not saying don't worry about Indigenous concerns. I'm not saying any of that. But how about we do it as fast as possible with as few amount of friction as possible so that we can unleash Canadians? Do what Shopify did to build 15, 20% of our GDP online. Do that for our country. It would be fantastic. So like back to your question about partisanship, like I I think Canada is great. I think it's a misunderstanding to think that like what I'm trying to do is say Canada sucks and or what anyone is involved in Build Canada. All the people who involved in Build Canada, just to say the thing, David, They're here. I know plenty of Canadians who are super rich who have taken off. They live in Bahamas, they live in the States, they're gone. The Canadians in Build Canada are the ones who are staying. They love this country. I do too. I want to be here. And so what they're trying to do is say, here's what we know that we think will help us grow. If you want to grow Canada's GDP, GDP is basically how much the government spends, and we know how to do that, and we can only do so much of that. And then it's the amount of goods and services that we sell to Canadians and we sell to the world. That's selling stuff. That's what business people know how to do. And if you want to do more of it, ask them. And they'll tell you. And I think that's part of what we've been trying to say here. I think we have to move away from this kind of adversarial model to a model that actually served Canada quite well, of a tighter collaboration between business and labor and the government together, saying like, okay, how do we grow this thing? Because we're all in it together right now.
Right. I think that some of that requires knitting back together that sense that we're all in the same boat. Um, the
Dude, you know what? You know who the least trusted people are right now? Me. Business people. Like a lot of people listening to this are going to say, I don't trust this guy. He's some rich guy. He doesn't live in the universe that I live in, and they don't trust corporate executives. And people have a low view of it. I'm not in denial about that. I completely understand it. That's why we've been trying to be really transparent. We're trying to include lots of people. The vast majority of volunteers in Build Canada are not entrepreneurs. They're people who want a country where they can be an entrepreneur. But we
right.
have to earn that trust. I agree with you completely, David.
Um, so I want a big idea from you right now on the spot. I want a big idea from you because here's the deal: we have a prime minister who's actually talking your language. Time will tell whether he's walking the walk, but I mean the talk about the rhetoric around pace and ambition is almost identical to the rhetoric in the Build Canada website on those points. Um, Now he and the premiers are talking about national projects that are going to turn this economy around from its reliance on the United States and integration and its poor performance generally over time and supercharge this because you want the most prosperous country in the world. He says, let's start with the G7, whatever it would be a big change. Okay. What I'm hearing about national projects are all resource based.
Yep.
The whole discussion is about how many pipelines are we going to build? Where's an electricity corridor going to go? What's going to happen with the Ring of Fire and mining, right? But from your vantage point, are those the only kind of national projects we should be thinking about in this context?
Nope. I don't think so. I think we should be thinking about them. We've had some great resource folks who were involved in what we were doing with Build Canada, put out some great paper. Adam Waters put out a paper and then wrote something called Build Canadian Resources, which is great. No, let me give a couple that I think are really important. I've alluded to them before. So I think one national project should be to make our government AI first. We should, just like Estonia 15 years ago said, we're going to become a digital first country. The world is changing, and they did, and it drove a lot of growth and, frankly, better services for their people. We should be saying, let's take a Canadian built technology and let's take back the lead that we lost. And there's a way to do that. We have to become the number one consumers of this in the way that we deliver services. Look, a lot of what government does, I'm not talking about forest fires. I'm not talking about the military, but a lot of what they do, especially at the federal level, is they write checks and they give permission. You can enter the country, you can have a passport, you can build this plant, or you get this old age security, you get this health transfer, right? That's a very high level of abstraction. I'm not trying to oversimplify. But it turns out software is extraordinarily good at making the workflows associated with permission and writing checks faster, better, more effective. And AI software is going to do that in spades, especially as human beings try to interact with the government, get better answers. Like, why does it take weeks and weeks and weeks to learn whether your immigration process is approved? You should learn that in minutes because we should tell you you got a 98% chance of being approved or disapproved. We should be able to do that for people. So that's a national project. I think taking our national government and becoming AI first so that we, A, deliver better services, because not only do people not trust business people, they have an extremely low view of the value that they're getting from their government. That's not a good thing if you believe in good government. Number two, it will actually lower the cost of government, I believe, because we do have a lot of people doing a lot of stuff that computers can do. And I'm not trying to be cold-hearted about it, but the government can't be an employment agency of last resort. We have to say if there's ways we can deliver services faster, cheaper, and better, we have to transition people gracefully and properly, but we can have a smaller, more effective government. And third, and probably most important, we can build an industry with Canadian companies, there are hundreds of them here, where their first customer isn't a US government or a giant US company. Their first customer is the Canadian government who says, yeah, we want to buy that because we can take your AI product and make X or Y or Z inside the government better. So I think that's a national level project, a big idea that we can do. That was in one of the first papers we put out.
Yeah.
I think there's a third one related to that, which is military procurement. I think you can see a similar thing. We have to be using the money that we're going to allocate to increase our GDP, to increase our military commitment to buying from Canadian champion companies in for the next generation of warfare, and frankly for the next generation of type of companies. We have to buy from great Canadian and larger firms like MDA and the ones that have been around, but we should be spawning just like the Americans did in the Cold War our Silicon Valley through that spend. It would be a terrible waste if we just went off and bought entirely everything from either Americans or middle power like the Korea
That's
or the
sort of at
French or the UK.
conflict with speed, isn't it?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so because look at my example of the Ukraine. In a short span of a few years, under intensity, they've built a very substantial industry and learned a lot. And so
Right.
I think if the procurement goes the way it does right now, four different groups, you have ISAD, you have the Treasury Board, you have DoD, like I think that is going to take a long time. Like I said, I think there are models for military spending authority, devolving it down so that we can have a lot of people taking a lot of different opportunities to address kit out our military sooner.
Right. Right.
I, I got more big ideas, but I probably don't want to take too much more time. But hopefully that
No, but
answers two of them that you're
I
talking
mean,
about.
I do want to say I'm very, very impressed with Build Canada in terms of its
Thank you.
specificity of the suggestions, because to be honest, I've been critical of the Canadian business community for a long time because, they just have their hired guns. No, you never hear from a business person. You never hear from an actual business person.
Yep.
You hear from their hired guns who stand up and say, we'd like to pay less in taxes. And if you could kill some regs too, that'd be great. And everybody goes, well, fuck off, right? Um, so actually coming forward with real ideas that look like people have thought issues through and their specific application, it's a real contribution. So thanks for doing it.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. And I think there's two things. One is when we did this, I think you're totally right. Canadian business people have to stop hiding. They need to get out there and get engaged. If you're asking what we're trying to do with Build Canada, is get engaged, get involved. And if you don't want to write a policy memo, then host a salon. You want to go do something. You cannot. I mean, the origin story is that there were a lot of people complaining in a chat room, and I'm an action-oriented, high-agency person. I'm like, we can't just complain. We have to do something, and here's something we can do that will help the people to be productive. So I couldn't agree with you more, Canadian. And if they worry that people don't trust them, well, people don't trust what they don't know. And if you want to be trusted, you have to be transparent about what you're doing and what your motives are and who you are. And most of the business people I've met, not only are they patriotic, they're decent human beings. They're regular Canadians. Most of the folks didn't weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth. They made something happen, and Canadians should be proud of those folks. We actually just launched a project called Great Canadian Builders to tell stories of great Canadians who've built stuff because I think Canadians need to hear those stories. We should be proud of those folks. So I'm glad you like it, and I think your point also, as I said, enough with the tweet storms, enough with the hand waving of like, hey, I went to a meeting. Like, if you want government to do something, be specific, actionable, evidence-based, say, like, here's the thing. I am fine with people disagreeing. The most important thing we're trying to do, David, is there's this concept in political discourse, I'm sure you've heard of it, called the Overton window,
Yeah.
right? The Overton window. Yeah, it's like, for those who don't know who are listening, it's like ideas which are outside the realm of what is appropriately able to be discussed. An example would be 30, 40 years ago, gay marriage was not something that most people talked about as a mainstream idea. It is clearly the Overton window has shifted. Now, typically, you know what happens for that to occur? You need, for lack of a better term, high status people to say, I'm willing to support this idea, or at least let's float this idea, right? And so, hey, if you're a successful business person, you should be putting your name out there if you want people to be exploring a broader range of ideas. And that's what we're trying to do, in part with Build Canada. Ultimately, what we're really trying to do is get thousands of people volunteering at all levels with a very simple message, which is, hey, help us build. We can do this. And also, hey, Canadians, don't wait for the government to do this for you. The cavalry is not coming. Go step up, go volunteer, get involved, help, because we are facing a crisis as a country, and we have everything we could to become incredibly prosperous, but it can't be done just by belly aching and whining. My favorite Canadianism is giver. Get behind the car, giver. Let's get it out of the ditch and let's get going.
Yeah.
We put that on the t-shirts, by the way. People love that.
Giver?
Giver. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody likes it. Because you know what? To me, that is the essence of, if you want to ask in one word, what are we trying to do? Canada needs more giver. That's what we have. We know how to do that. We can do that. And that's what we need a lot of times. Like, okay, enough with the problems and the reasons why we can't do something. Let's just fucking go. Let's try. It's an oversimplification, but honestly, I think it carries a lot of weight.
Hey, would you come back in a year or so and see where things are at?
It would be my pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
Awesome. In the meantime, I'll trade you a Hurley Burly shirt for a Giver shirt. I would love to have a Giver
Definitely. Deal. Deal
a
done.
Giver t-shirt. All right.
No
I'd like
problem.
to thank our presenting sponsor, Telus, as well as CN Rail and Fidelity Investments Canada, all you Herle Burly-ites who watch or listen to this show, and most of all, Daniel, for giving of his time, both for this podcast and for the Build Canada exercise. We've all got to get our shoulder behind this wheel if it's going to happen. So thanks for doing it.
Giver. Thanks, David. Take care.
All right.